Hey Ewing, I'm super glad you're living your best lives right now, despite being in class. Remember how scared we all were that North Korea was going to blow up the entire country via nuclear bombs? Of course, President Trump eliminated that threat, but let's talk as if he didn't. Let's take a quick look at what US cities Korea would like to bomb. Quite a few on the East Coast. Still seems safer than Montana, North Dakota, and the Colorado Wyoming border, though, doesn't it? Let's imagine Korea detonates a nuclear bomb in the air above Ewing. The following will happen. Everyone within a 7-kilometer radius will die of radiation poisoning. 197 square kilometers are covered with a giant fireball, and 9,370 square kilometers will experience an air blast that can range from demolishing the strongest buildings to breaking windows. Lastly, 12,960 square kilometers will experience thermal radiation, aka third-degree burns. The main blast covers from Hamilton to Morristown, and the peripheral radioactive fallout can reach all the way up to Newfoundland, Canada. Now, this was modeled after the largest bomb the USSR ever made, Tsar Bomba. Not all bombs are this big, but they can be, and this particular blast will result in about 650,000 deaths and 1.7 million injuries. Here's a quick breakdown about the anatomy of a nuclear explosion. In seconds, a nasty fireball vaporizes every building, structure, and man in its path with million-degree temperatures. Just outside this, there's major radiation contamination that will kill about 50% of everything living in its path. This death could be slow or fast, spanning from hours to days and possibly even weeks. Radiation contamination can last years, though, as demonstrated by the Chernobyl explosion. Fruits and veggies from outside Chernobyl were sold in markets years after the accident, and people slowly started experiencing radiation sickness from it. This contamination can even spread to drinking water. Next, we visit extreme wind gusts that can knock over buildings. In the final ring of the storm, people suffer from third-degree burns. Now, we can test nuclear weapons with computers so that all this damage to the environment doesn't happen unnecessarily. While this isn't entirely accurate right now, but as testing continues, it will become more and more accurate. Until then, we'll keep blowing up the desert. Let's go a little more in depth about the testing for nuclear bombs. In the United States, these weapons would be fired at targets at a test site, far away from any civilians for safety and sometimes secrecy. They would then be evaluated for performance, possible improvement, and possibility of mass production. But how does one test nuclear weapons? Where can someone find a discrete place large enough to test weapons with the power to level cities? Well, the United States found its place. Nye Country, Nevada. About 100 miles from Las Vegas lays the Nevada Test Site, currently known as the Nevada National Security Site. On May 19, 1953, a 32-kiloton bomb was tested. This bomb was 3 times as powerful as the one dropped on Hiroshima during World War II, and upon testing, was much more powerful than initially calculated. Upon testing, wind patterns caused an unsafe amount of nuclear fallout to fall upon surrounding towns. The bomb earned the moniker Dirty Harry for the mess of fallout it left behind. Over time, exposure to this fallout, along with fallout from future tests, caused many citizens in the area surrounding the test site to get leukemia, thyroid cancer, breast cancer, and more. This act of negligence by the U.S. government went almost unnoticed for a long time, until the case of Allen v. U.S. in 1984, a whole 30 years after the incident. The case resulted in over $2.5 million being awarded to 8 individuals with the aforementioned diseases. What did we learn from this event? With the development of nuclear weapons, some individuals have to experience the effects of nuclear war, even when none is present. Additionally, governments need to take extra precaution not to harm the citizens these weapons are supposed to protect. Now let's take a look at the global influence of nuclear weapons. Following the devastation of the Second World War, it was common belief that future wars would amplify that horror to an unimaginable magnitude. Those who have developed America's nuclear programs often shared these views. One prominent quote from physicist Albert Einstein reads, "I do not know what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." What does he mean by this? He likely means that World War III will be so devastating to the world that it might cause the world to take a step backward from technology, leaving World War IV to be fought just as cavemen might fight. Others interpret this quote as World War IV will be non-existent, since World War III will involve primarily nuclear weapons, which will end up wiping out the entire human population. Back to history. With the development of the Cold War, tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States began to slowly increase. After the Soviets developed nuclear weapons of their own in 1949, it was predicted that the following conflict would be a nuclear one. Almost immediately, American military began to draw up battle plans for the impending nuclear war with the Soviet Union. So the year is 2018, and since you're watching this video, that's probably a good sign that nuclear war hasn't engulfed the Earth yet. So why is that? As the nuclear arms race continued, the Americans and Soviets made nuclear bombs that were more powerful, but could also be delivered in a multitude of ways. As a result, the concept of mutually assured destruction, MAD, was conceptualized. Basically, when two nuclear-armed nations have less than diplomatic relations with one another, if one were to use nuclear weapons, the other would be able to retaliate before the first attack even hit, therefore engulfing both nations in flames. An interesting result of MAD is that, unlike experts predicted, wars have actually become less violent and resulted in less loss of life. Don't believe me? Take a look at this graph. Since World War II, the amount of battle deaths has taken a large downward spiral. This is because no large nations have directly fought each other since World War II, in fear of triggering MAD. Despite the number of civil wars and proxy wars, we are currently living in the most peaceful times in human history. What does this mean for the common man? Unlike the previous centuries, one needs to worry less about being drafted. Additionally, the lack of war contributes to overpopulation in some areas. Capitalism causes people to acquire more consumer products since there's less panic of imminent attack. Throughout history, nuclear war has done nothing but negatively affect the economy. Our country spends so much money trying to maintain and create these nuclear weapons, causing nothing but an economic decline. This was seen in 1981 when the U.S. spent almost $20 million on research and maintenance of nuclear weapons. You may be wondering how the manufacturing of these weapons hurt the economy. Since the projects surrounding nuclear weapons were called upon by the national government, everyday citizens just like you and me were paying for these weapons with each paycheck, all in the form of federal taxes. This simple move by the federal government, built to protect the United States citizens, resulted in a net loss of 270,000 jobs. Instead of taxpayers spending their money on basic needs like food, housing, and medical care, this money had been taken out of their income as taxes, and this created a huge decline in jobs available at the time. Studies show that if the government and Pentagon had not mandated this tax money for nuclear warfare, almost 750,000 jobs would have remained steady or been created. Taxes spent on the military decreased consumer spending, which in turn reduced revenue for many industries. When people aren't purchasing as much as they should, the economy dives. These spending changes based on income affected many different industries in the United States. Funding for nuclear weapons resulted in a large job loss in the agricultural industry involving dairy and livestock. Consumers simply couldn't afford to be purchasing as many groceries because of the high taxes for military spending. Yes, nuclear warfare created jobs in maintaining nuclear weapons systems, but these jobs were for highly trained professionals. The mass loss in blue-collar jobs was so great that the creation of these weaponry jobs did not help the majority of American citizens. Even now, a nuclear war would not create as many jobs as a war like World War II did. World wars have primarily demanded human soldiers to fight for their country. The U.S. had to draft 11 million young men and create war factories, which brought safer jobs back in the United States. This creation of jobs seemed to be the solution to unemployment. War saved our country. Now, with the push of a button, mass devastation may be employed on another country with minimal human soldiers put at risk. While this saves the lives of our own, it also does not create nearly as many jobs as it used to. We still continue to build up our military with nuclear weapons to protect us in case of a threat from other countries, but our taxes have become our worst enemy. Is it possible that nuclear war has stopped war altogether? Earlier in the video, we mentioned how many countries are actually so afraid of nuclear war and its effects on the human race that they are actually afraid to start any war, worried that this will end the world. After all, it has been 73 years since the last nuclear attack. This attack on Nagasaki actually ended World War II, and now we find our nuclear weapons are actually continuing to protect us. Just like when we were kids, nobody wants to point fingers when Susie starts crying on the playground. Because when one kid points fingers at another, everybody starts blaming everybody else, and in the end, everybody gets detention. While nuclear war is not quite comparable to recess, no country wants to be the first to make a nuclear move. Once one bomb is fired, who knows how many will be fired? At that point, everybody is suffering, and there is no true winner to the war, or anybody left to even point fingers. War these days has an even more enormous cost than previous wars. While World War II may have ended with many citizens prospering, this will not be the case if nuclear war ensues. Even if the human race did survive, it's impossible to tell what civilizations would be able to recover physically, culturally, and economically. With nuclear war, there are many benefits and detriments. Most of the detriments seem to outweigh the benefits, though. Just to recap, our pros are digital testing, deterrent from war, white-collar job creation, and peace. Our cons, radioactive agriculture and drinking water, fiery blasts, end of human race, significant taxes, industry collapse, economic depression due to unemployment, and constant threats from other countries. Some solutions to these detriments can include the government taking more precaution when testing their nuclear weapons. As we said before, these weapons have a track record of infecting many towns with deadly diseases, even when testing. The government has to make sure they do not risk harming innocent people by finding test areas with a 0% chance in affecting citizens. Furthermore, to prevent the economic effects that come with nuclear war, we definitely have to cut some military spending on nuclear weapons. The less money spent, the less citizens are taxed, and the more spending money for items that encourage industry jobs that keep the flow of economy. The government can minimize the impact of these detriments by thinking of the big picture for citizens and the likelihood of nuclear war. Let's talk about that example from the beginning of the video. If Ewing were to be hit by a nuclear bomb, how could New Jersey try to save themselves? Remember duck and cover from 1951? Surprisingly, this will help save you. If you're directly hit by a nuclear bomb, unfortunately though, no amount of ducking and covering will help you. But if you're on the outskirts of the hit, duck and cover. Your desk or table might actually save you from injuries due to the intense wind gusts. We can come to the conclusion that nuclear warfare is not good for anyone, and we should try to avoid it completely and reduce its use. This includes testing, as well as military spending on these weapons. This will help civilization in the long run and create less problems in the world we live in and care for today.